Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is part 3 on how to build a PC. Now in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to fully assemble your parts and install Windows. Now this is going to be a build example, so you guys can just follow along and just get a general idea on how to build a PC, but you can use whatever parts you like. The idea is going to be roughly the same. Now if you are going to be following this build guide, I will link every part down below in the description so you can check it out if you want. So with that said, let's start building. Now some 3 tools that will help you out in your building process is some zip ties to help you do some clean cable management on the back once you are all done, a screwdriver to screw in all those screws, and also a small cup or bowl of some sort to put in all the screws that you're going to be using so that way they don't just roll off the table and get lost. And also you will need a very large surface to work with, so I would say use like a table, but do not use anything that can conduct static because you don't want to be shocking your components and then just pretty much killing your PC. So my advice would be to use like some sort of anti-static mat on top or the cardboard that your parts came in. Assuming it's large enough to cover the whole table, but just anything to prevent static from building up. With that said, now we could start with the parts. Kicking things off is the Ryzen 5 2600. At 6 cores and 12 threads, this should be enough power to handle any game you throw at it, with maybe some room to do some streaming and even some light editing. Next up is the motherboard. Here we will be using the Aorus B450 Mini ITX. Now, this board is pretty cool because it has Wi-Fi, it's a Mini ITX form factor, so it's going to be really compact, just gets all the necessary things we need, and plenty of other features like RGB. Solid board, solid price, great for gaming. As for the RAM, we will be using Corsair's Vengeance 16GB kit. Now, this should be plenty enough to handle Ryzen's RAM-hungry power, and also a little bit of future-proofing for games down the road. Pretty good set for a pretty good price. As for the graphics card, we will be using the GTX 1060 Superclocked from EVGA. Now, I am fully aware that there's RTX 2060 and the GTX 1160, but the reason why I have this card is because it's, well, I just have it lying around, and it's going to be used for demonstrational purposes. Now, if you want to use a different card like an RTX 2080, 2070, and maybe the 2060, by all means go for it. This is just going to be as an example. And even in 2019, it's actually a pretty good card. I've been using it lately for the latest AAA titles, and it's handling up pretty well. So if you want to get this one, by all means go for it, but look up online to see which graphics card you should get. As for the storage, we will be using a 120GB SSD from Crucial and a 2TB hard drive from Seagate. The reasoning behind these 2 drives is because Windows and all of our main programs are going to be located on the SSD. It's going to boot much faster, it's going to load much faster, and just generally much better performance. Now the hard drive will be used to store all of our mass data. It could be, well, in your case it could be just photos, documents, but in our case it's going to be where we put all of our games. Now you can adjust this to however you like. Maybe you want a 500GB SSD, maybe a 4TB hard drive. That is up to you. This is just going to be an example. As for the power supply, we will be using a 550 watt from EVGA. Now this is bronze rated, so you're going to save a little bit on the power bill, and also it's fully modular, so you can move all the cables that you want, take out the ones you need, the ones you don't need. So pretty solid PSU for the money. As for the case, we will be using the QBX from Cougar. Now this is a Mini ITX case, but if you want to choose a different case, by all means go for it. This is just going to be an example since this fits perfectly with our motherboard. It has all the drive supports that we need, it has enough clearance for our power supply and our graphics card, and generally a small form factor, so it's going to look clean on your setup. Now strangely enough, the day that I bought this is no longer available on the store. I don't know why. So I will try linking one if I can find it, but if it's not there, I guess you're pretty much gonna have to go with another one if you are following this build guide, of course. So for now, we will just continue the build. To start things off is the motherboard. First, take out the motherboard from the box and just place it on the side, and then look within the box to find your SATA cables, I/O shield, and the instruction manuals. You will need them. Once you have gotten everything out of the box, then you can remove the motherboard from the anti-static plastic bag and place it right on top of the cardboard where you will begin building. Next up on the list is the RAM. First, take it out of its box and place it on the side temporarily. Then go to your motherboard and then unhook all of the RAM slots. This is where you're going to be placing them. From here, you can grab your RAM and then start putting them one by one. You will notice that there will be a notch in the center about 2/3 down, which indicates that the RAM can only go one way in the motherboard. So make sure you place them accordingly. Once you have set them in place, then you have to firmly press down, and then you will hear a little clip sound. This will indicate that you have successfully placed the RAM, and then you can move on to the next one, following the same rule. Next up is the CPU. Start by removing everything within the box, so the CPU itself, its sticker, some paperwork, as well as the fan. But make sure you do not touch the thermal paste compound that is already placed on the fan, so try to keep that away from anything that could possibly touch it. Okay, now it is time to install the CPU. As you can see on my motherboard, I have to unscrew these brackets so I can install my fan. Once that is removed, we can now place our CPU in the CPU socket. Start off by lifting at the lever so we can install the CPU. Grab your CPU, ensuring that you do not touch any of the gold platings, and line it up accordingly with the gold triangle on the bottom of a corner. You will see another triangle on the motherboard to help you indicate which side it goes on. Once you have securely locked it in place, now you can pull the lever down. It will require a little bit of force for some motherboards, so just make sure you go all the way down until you hear a click sound, or it locks into place. Now to install the CPU cooler. As you can tell from the holes, it forms a rectangular shape, which indicates that there's only two ways that you could possibly put it in. Personally, I like to orientate the fan in a way that I can route my cable cleanly. So start off by looking at where the CPU fan header could be. Once you have found it, orientate the fan in a way that you can easily route the cable while maintaining some good cable management. Once you have found the most efficient orientation, now you could place the fan down and start screwing them in a cross pattern. Once you have already installed the fan, now you can connect the cable. As you can tell from the fan header, there's a little notch about halfway to the left. Align that with the cable that you have and plug it in. It only goes in one way. If you are having trouble finding where the fan header is, open up the manual so that way you can see something like CPU fan header or just fan header 1 in general. And there you have it for the easy part. You've installed the RAM, the CPU, and the CPU fan. Now we can start getting into the little details such as the PCI Express for the graphics card, the cables for our USB ports and drives, as well as general electric cables. Kicking things off is the 8-pin CPU header. This delivers electricity to the CPU, and while some motherboards have 4-pin or 8-pin, it is still the same type of connection. Next is the 24-pin. This delivers all the necessary electricity for the motherboard, to which it will be distributed to the rest of the components. Next is the SATA port. This allows access between your storage drives and the motherboard. And finally, the PCI Express slot. Here is where we will place our graphics card. Now before I begin explaining the other connections, we will first have to open up the case. Typically you will need to remove 4 thumb screws on the back to open the side panel. Once you have gotten those out, the side panel should just slide out. As you can see in my layout, there is a plate where the fan and drives go, so I will need to unscrew it to have access on the inside. With that out of the way, we can now check on what cables we will be working with. The first cable inside is the front USB 3.0 cable. This will connect onto your motherboard so you can connect USB drives that support USB 3.0 speeds. Next are the set of cables that contain the power switch, power LEDs, and hard drive LEDs. These will simply flash a small light on the front of the case to show that the PC is on and interacting with your components. Next is the HD audio. This cable is associated with the microphone and audio port on the front of the case. And finally, the fan cable. Some cases have a pre-installed fan, so you will need to connect this to one of the fan headers on your motherboard. Now that you know what cables are which, we can now install the motherboard on the case. Begin by getting the I/O shield from your motherboard's packaging and place it inside where there is a larger rectangular cutout. It only goes in one way because the port cutouts will line up with the ports on your board. Once it is properly aligned, place it on the rectangular cutout and push outwards from the inside of the case. To know that you've successfully placed it inside, you should hear a snap as well as you feeling that the I/O shield is firmly placed. Now to install the motherboard. First, locate the holes on your motherboard and line them up with the holes on your case. Some cases have indications for board sizes, so in our situation is a mini ITX case with a mini ITX board, so this should be easy to identify. Once you have found the holes, place your motherboard inside the case while aligning the holes on the case and the I/O shield. After that, you can then screw in the screws on the holes, and make sure not to over screw or else you can just risk damaging your motherboard. Just enough force to keep it in place. With the motherboard firmly placed, we can then plug in the cables. Let us start with the fan. Grab the cable and connect it to the fan header, typically called fan 1. If you are not sure where it is, look in the manual of your board to locate it. Once you have found the header, the cable only goes in one way, as you can see with the notch that it has on one side, so align it with that notch on the board. It should fit snugly. Next is the HD audio. Locate the header, but before you plug it in, take note that it only goes in one way, as you can see with one of the holes being blocked, so make sure that you are plugging it in the right way so you avoid bending the wire on the board. After that is the USB 3.0 cable. Like the others, it only goes in one way, so ensure that it fits snugly without bending any of the pins. Finally are the power switch, hard drive LEDs, and power LED cables. Considerably the most annoying ones, to be honest. Not all boards are designed the same, so in terms of where the wire goes, look inside the manual and identify where the ports are and locate how they should be positioned. Make sure you are familiarized with the diagram on the manual because flipping positive and negative cables could result into issues when booting into the system. My recommendation is to start with the power LEDs since they are single wires and are tricky to get your hands in tight spaces, so proceed onto the double wires after. Once everything is plugged in, take the time to double check the manual as well as ensuring that the wires are securely placed. Now that you have plugged everything in, now it is time to install the power supply. Begin by taking out all of the necessary cables out first, so for the GPU, CPU, 24-pin, and SATA connections. If you are not sure which cable is which, it should indicate which port is which with an acronym on the PSU port as well as the cable. So MB is for the motherboard, which is the 24-pin cable, CPU is for the CPU, SATA is SATA, and the VGA is for the graphics card. Pretty straightforward. After identifying everything, plug each cable to its port first. Make sure to firmly insert it until you hear the clip snap into place, and once that is done, then you may be able to place it inside the case. Now for my case, it requires me to disassemble it a bit more, so if you're following this build guide, remove the top panel that is held by 2 screws on the back. Then place the PSU inside the mounts, while aligning the screw holes of the PSU with the screw holes on the mounts. Since my case has a PSU mount located elsewhere, I have to route an extra cable that is included, but this is likely something that you will not encounter if you have a standard size case. So if you do have a standard size case, just mount it on the bottom of the case in the back while still aligning the holes. So it's pretty much the same idea, just located elsewhere. Now to install the graphics card. Before installing, prepare your case for installment. So start by unlatching the lock on the PCI slot, similar to how you prep the RAM slots. Then remove 2 PCI slots on the back of the computer, so that way the ports are accessible. Similar to how you installed the RAM, the GPU also has a notch, so it will only go in one way. Begin by lowering the card into place, and once it is lined up, firmly press down until you hear a lock. The sound will be similar like the RAM slot locking mechanism. After that, screw the GPU onto the bracket so it is firmly locked into place. If you do not do this step, you will risk sagging when moving around the PC, potentially damaging the card and the PCI slot, so please do not forget this step. Now to install our drives. In my case, it comes with a separate mount, which has room for 2 2.5-inch drives and 1 3.5-inch drive. Perfect for my build since I have 1 SSD and 1 hard drive. First, get your drives out with the screws needed. It should come with one, and if not, the case you purchase should have some extras. Begin by getting one of your drives. In my case, I will go with an SSD first, and align the holes with the mounts. Once aligned, you may screw it into place. Next up is the hard drive, and same as before, align the holes with the mount cutouts, and then screw it into place. Remember, don't over tighten, just enough to keep it in place. Now to connect all the cables from your power supply and drives. First, let us start with the 24-pin connection. Find the 24-pin port on your motherboard and connect it there. There is a lock-on clip on one side, so it only goes in one way. Press it in firmly until you hear it clip. Next are the SATA power cables for your drives. You will simply connect one of each drive that you have. Now if you look closely on the cable, you will notice that it has an L-shaped plug-in, so it only goes in one way. It does not have a lock-on clip, so you will need to press it in firmly until you see that it's set in place. Try not to wiggle it too much though. Next is the GPU power cable. Similar to the 24-pin cable, it has a clip, so it only goes in one way, and some GPUs require a 6-pin, 8-pin, etc., so connect the necessary amount of cables needed. Once you have it placed, press it in firmly until you hear it clip on. After that, you can then plug in the CPU power cable. Now, because I didn't look ahead of time and did not realize that my power cable is completely blocked by another cable, which would require disassembling the whole PC, to which I forgot to record, I will simply say that it is just like the 24-pin cable and the GPU cable, so it only goes in one way and it has a clip to lock on. Finally, to connect the drives to our motherboard. Grab the SATA data cables that came with your motherboard and install them onto your drives. Like the SATA power cables, it has an L shape, so it only goes in one way, but it has a lock-on clip, so press firmly until you hear it snap into place. On the other end of the cable, you will need to connect it to the motherboard's SATA ports. Now, do not, and I repeat, do not just plug it into any port. There is a specific order in doing so. Grab your manual and find the SATA ports page. There it will tell you in which order to plug it into. It is like this because the drives need to boot whatever is inside in order, so for example, the drive with Windows installed should be the first one to boot. As you can see in my motherboard, I only have 4 SATA ports, with port 0 being the first to boot on the bottom left, and port 3 being the last to boot on the top right. I recommend putting your OS, likely Windows 10, on the SSD. So grab the other end of your SATA cable from your SSD and plug it into port 0. As for the hard drive, plug it into port 1. This order will ensure that you are booting into your OS in a timely fashion. And that is it for the building process. All that is left now before putting the panel back on is cable management for a cleaner look. Now this will be different for anyone since not all cases have the same layout or cable management features, but I will explain the general information to help you in your build. Begin by removing all the panels so you can have access to the cutouts for your cables. From there is just planning on where to route them. I recommend putting cables with connections on the opposite side of your case as close to the boards as possible, so that way it has more travel distance, which results in less cable cluttering. One tip to utilize is zip ties to lock your cables in firmly. It can help you stay organized and know which cable is which by spacing them out. It will also give a cleaner look when routing them in sharp turns. Another tip is to have many cables routed using lots of 90-degree turns. It will look organized, give you extra space for zip tie locations, as well as less clogging when you have a lot of cables located in one area of the case. Common issues I encounter is a 24-pin cable. It is the thickest cable of the entire PC, and some cases do not have enough room on the back for you to slide your panel back on with ease. One trick I have is to stretch it as far as possible across the case so there is less sagging, which is the cause of the panel not shutting smoothly. Once you have patiently routed your cables, you should have something like this. Compared to just throwing everything in, this guide will help you on having a clean look and stay organized. If you are confident and feel accomplished, proceed on to the next step by sliding in the panel. If you are having trouble sliding the panel in, likely you have some more cable management to do, so take the time to rethink your strategy. Once you are done with the final touches and close the side panels, now you can do the ultimate test. Will it boot? It is scary in the beginning if this is your first time building, but have no fear, since there are plenty of guides like mine as well as others online to help you in your troubleshooting. Now to see if it works. Plug in the power cable from the power supply, hook it up to a monitor, and press the power button. If it takes you to the BIOS, then congratulations, you have just built your first PC. If not, make sure to double check the cables that you have to see if they are plugged in all the way, that the power switch cables are not reversed, as well as turning the power supply switch on, since that is a very common mistake. Once everything is running, navigate in your BIOS and check to see if your drives are being displayed with the correct capacity and the RAM speed and size. Now to install the OS, which is very likely going to be Windows 10. According to Microsoft, you will need an installation media tool in order to put Windows on a PC with no OS. so we will only need a USB with at least 8 GB of storage available. Follow the link I've provided below so it can take you to Microsoft's ISO download page. Once you are there, hit download right underneath the Create Windows 10 Installation Media tab. After you have downloaded it, run the application, and it will first ask you to read the terms and agreements and then prepare for installation, and it will take some time, so please be patient. It will then ask you to either upgrade your PC or create an installation media. Choose installation media and then it will ask you where. Choose USB flash drive, to which it will ask you which USB, so make sure you already have your USB plugged in. Now it is going to wipe the USB clean, so make sure you have removed all of your important data from it. After hitting next, it will then install Windows onto the drive. Make sure you do not remove the drive during installation or turn off your PC. It will take a while, so leave it there for a few minutes. After the process is done, hit finish and close the program. Once the installation is on the USB, plug it in on one of the USB ports on your PC and then turn it on. Do not remove it during the process. It should take you to the Windows install page, and if not, try plugging it into another USB port or use a different USB. On the Windows setup, follow the instructions like selecting your language and Windows key. Now you can buy one from Windows or obtain one from a retailer, but where you get the key is up to you. But on this PC I will put I don't have one and then select Windows 10 Home. Check off the terms and agreements when you reach the type of installation page, hit custom, because there are some details you might want to tweak. Now on the page where it asks you where to install Windows, I strongly recommend to install it on an SSD since it will boot faster and handle all of your main programs quicker. In my case, since I have the 120GB SSD located on the first SATA cable, I will put Windows on drive 0. Drive 1 is the hard drive and drive 2 is the USB. Now you just wait for Windows to install. After install, it will likely reboot on its own and take you directly to the main Windows 10 setup. From here, you can remove the USB, tweak the Windows 10 preferences, and give yourself a good pat on the back because you, my friend, have just completed your very first PC build. And that is it for this video, guys. I really do hope that part 1, 2, and 3 on how to build a PC was helpful enough for you so that way you can build your own. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it down below and hit that like button and make sure to subscribe so that way you can see more future content like this down the road. Anyways guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you guys on the next one.